Jax's revenge domain. The moment Heath Morrison said, "This entire defense contract would take half the time if my nephew managed the engineering specs," the conference room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I sat at the far end of that polished mahogany table, the only guy with actual combat engineering experience in the room, and every head slowly turned toward me. They pretended it was just a casual comment. It wasn't. It was a calculated shot fired with surgical precision. I'm Charles Pearson, 49 years old, and I've been designing aircraft systems for 20 years. Spent 8 of those in the Air Force before coming to Pinnacle Defense Systems. Never thought I'd be sitting in a room where some MBA punk questioned whether I could handle what I'd been doing since before he graduated high school. Robert Cross, the company founder, leaned back in his leather chair without so much as a twitch. The board members waited for his response like soldiers waiting for orders, but he stayed. Quiet. Not yet, anyway. Heath folded his hands and stared straight at me. "Brandon understands the AI integration our Pentagon contacts are demanding," he continued. His voice made that last part sound like gospel truth. Brandon Morrison sat 3 chairs down, crisp suit, perfect haircut, and that smug expression you only see on guys who've never had dirt under their fingernails. When our eyes met, he gave me this little nod like he was already measuring my office for new furniture. I felt the resignation letter in my briefcase before I even reached for it. I'd printed it the night before, not because I wanted out, but because I knew exactly what ground I was standing on. Heath had been working this angle for months. The tone in his voice just confirmed it. I stood up slowly. "If you want your nephew running the show," I said, keeping my voice level, "then this belongs to you." I placed the folded letter on that table. Brandon's smile stretched wider, sharp and satisfied. Robert finally spoke. "Fine," he said, voice calm as still water. "Give the project to Brandon." Heath exhaled like he'd just won the lottery. Brandon straightened up in his chair, probably already planning his victory speech. Then Robert turned toward me. "Charles," he said, "my office. 10 minutes. Bring that letter." His tone didn't show anger, didn't show sympathy either. It didn't show anything at all, and somehow that felt worse than getting yelled at. I walked out of that boardroom with the letter in my hand, and this strange feeling that whatever waited behind Robert's door was going to change a lot more than just my job. When I first moved to Colorado Springs 15 years ago, I never imagined I'd end up in boardrooms where somebody else's family connections decided whether my 20 years of experience mattered. I came here with my discharge papers, a toolbox full of precision instruments, and the rock-solid belief that if you knew your stuff and worked hard, that counted for something. Pinnacle Defense Systems was supposed to be that place. During my early years, Heath Morrison barely acknowledged I existed. If we passed in the hallway, he'd give me a quick nod and keep walking. Back then, his indifference was easier to deal with than what came later. "Charles, you always know which system to troubleshoot first," my old supervisor Jason Burke used to tell me, and he meant it. During those budget cuts in 2019, when half our contracts got pulled, I spent 16-hour days rebuilding test protocols that saved 2 major projects. Jason called me his anchor. Heath called it luck. That should have been my first clue we were living in different worlds. Brandon showed up right after the company landed that big Pentagon contract. Heath introduced him at the monthly meeting with his hand on the kid's shoulder. "Fresh perspective," he said, looking straight at me like youth automatically trumped experience. Brandon shook my hand with that practiced grip they teach you in business school. "I've heard your engineering work is solid," he said, and the way he paused before that last word told me everything I needed to know. The changes started small. A technical review that should have included me suddenly didn't need engineering input. A stress analysis I'd written came back with whole sections rewritten to remove my name. Data I'd verified got altered before reaching the board, smoothing over Brandon's calculation errors and burying my corrections. When I mentioned it to my team, Danny Rodriguez lowered his voice. "We see what's happening, Charles, but you know how Heath operates. We can't exactly file a complaint." I knew, and I could feel the foundation shifting under my feet long before Heath tried to push me out completely. The only thing I didn't know was when he decided that getting rid of me was worth risking a $75 million defense contract. Brandon Morrison walked into Pinnacle like the building had been designed specifically for him. He had that polished confidence you only get from never hearing the word no, an MBA from some Ivy League school, and a last name that opened doors faster than any security clearance could. His handshake was firm, practiced, and completely empty. "Looking forward to learning from you," he told me during his first week. The way he said it made it clear he figured the learning part was optional. The shift began quietly. A technical report I'd finalized came back with Brandon's notes scribbled all over the margins. "Just updating the language," he said, even though his revisions introduced calculation errors I had to fix later. In a team meeting, I presented the updated stress analysis for the wing component assembly. Brandon jumped in before I finished. "Actually, I walked the team through this integration on Monday," he announced. The room went quiet. Danny opened his mouth to correct him, but I shook my head. Wasn't worth embarrassing the kid in front of everyone. Not yet. A couple days later, Kevin Walsh, one of my junior engineers, caught me by the coffee machine. "Brandon pulled us aside yesterday," he whispered, "said the company needed more innovative thinking, said your methods were reliable but old school." I felt that sting in my throat but kept my voice steady. "Thanks for the heads up." The more Brandon pushed, the more Heath praised him. "He sees where defense technology is heading," Heath said in a meeting, tapping Brandon's shoulder. "We can't stick with outdated approaches." Board members started using the exact same phrases Heath used. Modernization, innovative leadership, cutting dead weight. Their eyes drifted toward me every time. I started documenting everything: emails, timestamps, technical discrepancies, conversations. I didn't know what I'd need later, just that the ground was shifting faster than I could get solid footing. Heath wasn't treating me like a senior engineer anymore. He was treating me like an obstacle, and I needed to figure out why a 20-year veteran made him nervous enough to rewrite company history. The first real warning shot came during our quarterly safety review. I'd spent weeks preparing the compliance documentation for our Pentagon oversight, making sure every protocol met federal standards. When I presented the findings, Heath interrupted before I got through the first slide. "Charles, this level of detail isn't necessary anymore," he said. "Brandon's developed a streamlined approach that cuts our documentation time in half." I looked around the room. Linda Foster and the other board members were nodding along like this made perfect sense. "Heath, these protocols aren't suggestions. They're federal requirements. We can't just skip steps because they take time." Brandon leaned forward with that fake, concerned expression. "I'm not suggesting we skip anything important. I'm talking about efficiency improvements that bring us into the 21st century." "What specific improvements?" I asked. He pulled up his laptop and projected a slide I'd never seen before. It showed my original safety checklist, with about half the items marked as legacy requirements in red text. My chest tightened. "Where did you get this?" I kept my voice level. "From the archived files," Brandon said smoothly. "I've been studying your previous work to understand where we can optimize. The thing is, that checklist wasn't archived. It was from my current working folder, and those legacy requirements he'd marked were actually the most critical safety checks we performed, the ones that kept pilots alive." After the meeting, I went straight to my workstation and checked the access logs. Sure enough, someone with administrative privileges had been in my files, multiple times over the past month. I called Danny over. "Did you authorize anyone to access my engineering folders?" He shook his head. "No, but Heath requested a general system backup last week. Said it was for disaster recovery planning." Disaster recovery. Right, Heath's first performance. Update landed in my inbox on a Thursday morning. The subject line was neutral, but the content was anything but. My name appeared exactly once, buried in a footnote at the bottom. "Engineering support provided as requested." I stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to my team. Danny responded within minutes. "Where are the system integration metrics? The safety protocol updates? The Pentagon compliance work?" I typed back, "Ask Heath." We both knew he wouldn't. At the next leadership meeting, Heath projected his updated report on the screen. "As you can see," he said, pointing at his slide, "process inefficiencies stem from legacy engineering approaches. Charles's methods worked years ago, but current defense requirements demand a different strategy." I kept my eyes on the table. Legacy approaches was code for anything I'd built. Brandon leaned forward with fake humility. "I've been testing a new AI-driven analysis system. With proper support, we could cut weeks off the development timeline." Linda Foster, one of the board members, nodded. "Speed is critical for these Pentagon deadlines." I spoke quietly but firmly. Speed without proper testing puts lives at risk. Several steps Brandon removed are required by federal safety standards. Heath's smile tightened. Standards can be updated with proper justification. They can, I said, but not without full disclosure to Pentagon oversight. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then another board member chimed in, echoing Heath's earlier words. We need innovation, not resistance. There it was. Words don't travel that far unless somebody planted them. Through it all, Robert Cross sat at the head of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. He neither agreed nor disagreed. He just watched. By the end of that meeting, the damage was clear. The board didn't just hear Heath. They believed him. And Robert's silence meant he saw exactly what was happening, but was choosing not to step in yet. I left that room wondering what he was waiting for, and why he wanted to see how far Heath would push this thing. The breaking point came 2 weeks later during our monthly project review. Heath had called the meeting to discuss optimization opportunities in our current Pentagon contract. When I walked into the conference room, Brandon was already at the head of the table with his laptop connected to the projector. Thanks for joining us, Charles, Heath said without looking up from his notes. Brandon's prepared a presentation on efficiency improvements. Brandon clicked to his first slide. It was titled Engineering Modernization Initiative and featured a photo of our newest fighter jet prototype. Professional looking, complete with corporate branding. The second slide made my blood run cold. It was my stress analysis from the wing assembly project, but with Brandon's name in the author field and a completion date from last week. My work, my calculations, my 6 months of careful testing, all credited to someone who couldn't tell a stress fracture from a coffee stain. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was calculating exactly how deep this fraud went. Robert's office door was already open when I got there, resignation letter in hand. He didn't gesture for me to sit, just looked at me with that expression impossible to read. Close the door, Charles. I did. My palms were damp from gripping that letter so tight. He nodded toward it. You brought that this morning? Yes. Why? His voice was even, not accusing, almost curious. I met his eyes. Heath's been clearing the path for Brandon for months. Today wasn't spontaneous. And if I stayed quiet any longer, I'd become the excuse they needed to tear apart 20 years of safety protocols. Robert studied me closely. What do you think Brandon can't handle? I didn't sugarcoat it. The load calculations, the federal compliance layers, the safety structures I built during the last Pentagon audit. There are systems that make sense because of how they were designed with military specifications in mind. Remove the wrong component and the whole thing fails catastrophically. He exhaled slowly. I suspected as much. Suspected what? My pulse jumped. That Heath has been manipulating performance data, he said, covering Brandon's mistakes, presenting selective metrics. The numbers haven't added up for weeks, but I needed confirmation. I held my breath. And now I have it, he said, eyes sharpening. You just gave it to me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he opened a drawer and slid a business card across his desk. Defense Contract Solutions. They're one of our most critical Pentagon liaisons. I frowned. You want me to work for them? I want you somewhere Heath can't manipulate you or the data, he said. If you stay here, he'll bury you under enough false documentation to confuse even Pentagon investigators. DCS is the only place he can't touch your work. The card felt heavier than it should have. Robert's move wasn't a dismissal. It was strategy on a board I hadn't realized we were both playing on, and I needed to understand why he wanted me outside the company before the consequences hit. Defense Contract Solutions welcomed me with professional handshakes and a stack of technical files thicker than a phone book. My temporary contract was framed as a routine compliance review, but the way their director, Sarah Mitchell, looked at me told a different story. We appreciate you stepping in, Sarah said, handing me the first binder. Pinnacle's reports haven't matched our Pentagon projections for months. Robert said you're the only person who can clarify the discrepancies. The weight of those words settled in my chest. I sat at a workstation near Sarah's office and opened the top file. The first page showed a timeline I recognized. My original stress analysis from the wing assembly project. But the next few pages were wrong. Critical calculations removed, safety margins relabeled, test data smoothed into suspiciously perfect patterns. I flagged one section and called Sarah over. Where did this come from? Heath sent it, she said. Claimed the engineering team approved the modifications. I kept my voice level. I never approved any of this. She frowned. Then why does his report say you streamlined these protocols? because he needed Brandon to look like a genius. But I didn't say that yet. 2 hours later, Sarah returned with another file. "Charles, look at these test logs. They don't match your original safety parameters." She was right. They didn't. The logs time-stamped as Brandon's efficiency improvements were identical to preliminary drafts I'd written months earlier. Drafts I never released because they failed basic safety standards. I called Danny back at Pinnacle. "Did Heath access my archived files?" He hesitated. "Charles, he requested administrator access to your workstation. Said it was for a Pentagon audit. I didn't think I could refuse." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. These documents weren't revealing a misunderstanding, they were revealing fraud. Heath hadn't just altered reports. He'd stolen my work, rebranded it as Brandon's innovation, and buried every safety concern I'd raised. And whatever he was hiding was dangerous enough to risk the lives of pilots who'd fly aircraft built with compromised specifications. By the third day at Defense Contract Solutions, the files stopped whispering and started screaming. Every document I opened pointed to the same architect, Heath Morrison. I spread 3 reports across the table. Sarah leaned over my shoulder as I traced a line with my finger. "This performance projection," I said, "is built on Brandon's supposedly improved calculations." Sarah leaned closer. "But this test log shows the original failure rates." "My failure rates," I corrected her. "This was my preliminary analysis." Brandon copied it and changed the timestamps. She sucked in a breath. "How many?" "Enough to make incompetence look like innovation." The next file was worse. It contained budget reallocations I'd never authorized. Hundreds of thousands shifted into Brandon's AI integration project. I flipped to the signature page. "Here," I said. "He claimed the cost savings came from my department's efficiency improvements." "That's impossible." Sarah's voice dropped. "Charles, this is intentional fraud." I nodded. He inflated Brandon's performance metrics and buried every safety violation under my name. Heath signed off on all of it. Sarah stepped out and returned with the compliance officer. "Marcus North's system flagged major inconsistencies," Marcus said. "Your findings triggered an automatic Pentagon audit." I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just handed him the folder. "These are the discrepancies. Handle them according to protocol." He scanned the pages and let out a low whistle. "This isn't sloppy work. This is deliberate falsification." "Send it to Robert Cross," I said, "and the board. They need to see exactly what they've been approving." Marcus nodded. "We'll transmit today." By late afternoon, Defense Contract Solutions' formal audit packet was already en route to Pinnacle Defense Systems, complete with digital signatures, timestamps, and confirmation that the altered files originated under Heath's authorization. The facade he'd built, meeting by meeting, report by report, was about to collapse under its own weight. And one way or another, Heath was going to have to face the truth he'd buried. The emergency meeting happened less than 24 hours after DCS sent their audit. I wasn't invited, but Danny called me the moment he stepped out of the boardroom. "Charles, it was brutal," he whispered. I could hear voices behind him, raised and desperate. Then Robert's voice cut through, steady and cold. "Heath, explain the discrepancies." There was rustling, stammering, then Heath's weak reply. "Those logs were taken out of context." Robert didn't soften. "Defense contracts. Solutions traced the files to your authorization, not context, control." Another voice followed, Linda Foster from the board, driving the point home. "You misled us, Heath. For months." Brandon tried to jump in. "My uncle didn't mislead anyone. The data was misinterpreted." "Sit down, Brandon," Robert said. "No anger, just command. Your AI integration collapsed the minute Charles stepped out. The audit shows you removed required safety protocols from a federally monitored contract." Brandon's voice cracked. He could have helped if he hadn't quit. Linda cut him off. "He quit because you two pushed him out." Danny whispered, "Charles, you should have seen their faces." Another board member spoke next. "Brandon will step down from all project authority effective immediately." Brandon sputtered. "You can't do this." Robert overrode him, and Heath Morrison is terminated pending criminal investigation. The room fell into heavy silence. I could almost feel it through the phone. Reputations cracking, careers ending. Then Linda said something I didn't expect. "We owe Charles Pearson an apology." Danny exhaled. Everyone agreed, even Robert. I pressed my hand to my chest, steadying myself. Noted. I ended the call before the emotion could spill over. Justice was finally happening, but I still didn't know what that meant for me. Robert chose a small diner near Pikes Peak, far from Pinnacle's glass towers and sterile conference rooms. When I walked in, he was already seated, coffee untouched in front of him. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Charles, sit." I did, keeping my posture steady even as my nerves hummed. He folded his hands. "You handled this with remarkable discipline." I met his eyes. I handled the facts. "That's all." "That," he said quietly, "was exactly what I needed you to do." I frowned. "You needed me to leave Pinnacle?" "I needed you outside Heath's reach," he replied. "If you'd stayed, he would have buried you under enough false documentation to confuse even Pentagon investigators. DCS was the only place he couldn't manipulate your work." I let that settle. The resignation that felt like an ending had been part of a larger strategy, one I hadn't known I was standing inside. Robert leaned forward. "Precision has always been your strength. You don't inflate numbers. You don't play politics. You simply work with facts, and that's rare." I stayed quiet, waiting. He placed a contract folder on the table. "This is a long-term independent consulting agreement. You'd work for DCS and for me directly, not as an employee, but as a partner." The word hit like a solid pulse in my chest. "Partner?" Robert nodded. "You'll lead the technical oversight for all Pentagon contracts we handle next quarter. No internal sabotage, no political interference, full autonomy." I breathed slowly, letting the weight of it settle. Not a return, not a second chance inside Pinnacle. Something entirely different, something that didn't require me to shrink to survive. "I'll review the contract tonight," I said. Robert allowed the faintest smile. "Take your time. This is your future to choose." As I left that diner, I realized the vindication I'd imagined, walking back into Pinnacle victorious, was too small for the life opening in front of me. I signed the consulting contract with Defense Contract Solutions on a quiet Tuesday morning. No ceremony, no handshakes beyond Sarah's professional smile. The signature felt less like closure and more like oxygen finally reaching a part of me that had been suffocating. Later that afternoon, as I reviewed the first phase of Robert's upcoming defense initiative, Danny called. His voice was steady in a way I hadn't heard in months. "It's official," he said. "Heath's termination became permanent. Brandon's out too. They said the falsified reports were grounds for immediate dismissal with no appeal." I exhaled slowly. "Their doing, not mine." "I know," Danny replied. "Everyone knows." He paused before, adding, "The company's restructuring. Pentagon oversight is rewriting half our safety protocols. People keep saying your resignation didn't break Pinnacle. The lies about you did." He hung up after promising to stay in touch, and I leaned back in my chair, letting those words settle. For the first time in months, I felt neither vindicated nor angry. I felt free. Robert stopped by DCS later that week. Didn't knock, just appeared in the doorway with that same calm expression. "Settling in?" "I am," I said. "Good," he replied. "There's a second contract coming after this one. Bigger. You'll lead it." I nodded. "I'm ready." As he left, I realized how strange it was to be valued without having to defend my place at the table. I didn't need to return to Pinnacle to prove anything. Not to the board, not to those who doubted me, and not to the ones who tried to replace experience with connections and family names. 3 months later, I was standing in my new office at Defense Contract Solutions, looking out at the Colorado mountains. The nameplate on my desk read Charles Pearson, Senior Technical Consultant. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the title, it was in the work itself, designing systems that would keep pilots safe, working with people who valued expertise over politics, building something that mattered. My phone buzzed. Sarah's text was short. "Pentagon just approved your safety protocol recommendations for implementation across all contractors. Congratulations." I stepped outside into the late afternoon mountain air, Colorado Springs humming around me. I hadn't rebuilt what Pinnacle took. I'd built something entirely different, something that belonged to me. They used to rely on my work and pretend they didn't. Now they'd rely on the systems I created without ever being able to touch me again. Sometimes the best victory is simply being free to do the work you love without someone trying to tear you down. That's all any of us really want, to do good work and be left alone to do it. In the end, the best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you. It's building something so good they can never touch it again. Real strength isn't proving you were right all along. It's walking away from the fight and letting your work speak louder than their politics ever could.